Hey guys, Instructor Pilot Chris here, and as you can see, today's video will be of the Umx Waco bind and fly, and this will be a repair video. And this happened this morning. It was entirely my fault. This is a great product. I happened to buy this one from Horizon Hobby as a bind and fly probably about a year ago. I have a ton of flights on it. It's very docile. It's a great airplane for beginners and for advanced pilots. It's a lot of fun. I would consider myself slightly more advanced, and I was flying in conditions that weren't favorable for a light aircraft, and actually had two crashes today. One of them was not my fault, not entirely. I had a Spectrum lockout. I don't know if you've had that happen. If you fly Spectrum, it could happen to you. I know it can happen with other radios. Back in the day, I used to fly 72 megahertz, and that's basically the frequency. You'd have a crystal, and each radio was tied to the receiver in the aircraft by a crystal and a number. And so there'd be different radio frequencies. Those also had problems. Sometimes you would have somebody else turn on a radio and shoot you down, meaning that someone else would have the same frequency, and when they activated their radio, yours would crash. So your aircraft would crash. Nowadays, I have not experienced that. I think we're on 2.4. It's a different spectrum. Maybe that's perhaps why they call it Spectrum. But it's the bandwidth of frequencies. And so nowadays, the electronics are very intelligent, and nobody really knows or interacts. It does it on its own. You turn on your transmitter, and there's a receiver, and you bind it, and they're connected. So it's a lot smarter technology. However, you can still have issues. And so what I encountered this morning is I was flying this aircraft directly at me, relatively low, and I was facing the aircraft with my transmitter directly. And essentially it was low speed into the wind, but the aircraft just stopped responding and slowly did a aileron turn into the ground. And I'll attach that video. It wasn't that crazy, but it is frustrating. I don't mind when I do something stupid and crash, but it is frustrating when your equipment fails. And when I said it wasn't entirely my fault, the thing that you're not supposed to do, and I don't know if this is all radios or Spectrum, but my understanding is that your transmitter antenna more or less sends out a ring of reception or frequency. It emits it to, in this case, this aircraft. And my understanding, and it would align with what happened, if you point the transmitter directly at the plane, there's like this dead zone, and there's reception around that's being transmitted, but it's not being picked up by your aircraft. And that's my understanding. It would be true on what happened today. I noticed my transmitter was directly at the aircraft, and all of a sudden I just had no control of it, and it crashed. So that one was into the wind. It was gusting 15, but it was very slow ground speed, and it landed on grass, and it was fine. So that was one crash that was uneventful. This one was entirely my fault. I was doing maneuvers, and I tried to recover too low, and essentially what happened was I got some rotor off the back of a building, and so you have wind that's causing these spirals that are invisible, and I was doing my maneuvers behind the building. And so when I tried to recover, there was downdrafts, and as I tried to pull up from a dive and a spiral, it did not pitch quickly enough, or what I was anticipating, and so it impacted the ground at more or less an angle like this, downward, and it broke the front of the fuselage. This is removable anyway, so that's fine. It's just the front of the fuselage. And the gear came off. And so my comment to that is entirely my fault. It was stupid. It was worth it. I wanted to fly in the wind. I should say I wanted to fly, and I got sick of waiting for the wind to potentially die, so I went for it. You know, you're not really supposed to be flying these in 15 gusting to 20. That's not what they're designed for. However, I could have done that safely if I wasn't doing low maneuvers. It is capable. It's just not really recommended. But you can see that I was actually shocked. The motor itself is still attached. All my controls are attached, and I already inspected this twice to make sure I didn't miss anything. I mean, this is very intricate, delicate in this whole area here, and it's all fine. So sometimes, even though you have an impact on the front, it's possible that something got shifted inside, or maybe push rod or something broke. In this case, it appears that it's isolated to the front here and the gear. And I was looking at this, and I attribute this to the design. I don't think this was an accident, the way that this sheared off. With any accident, if you want to preserve life in a car or have limited damage, you want to slow down the impact. And I think that, I'm assuming, E-flite designed this in a way where this is designed to take the impact and break off, and the rest of the aircraft kept moving on the grass and is fine. So assuming that the engineers did this, then I give them kudos. I don't know how this looks to you. I think that this is a relatively easy fix. I already test fit this to where it needs to go, and it appears that all I need to do is epoxy it. There's going to be epoxy on the right and left, and then right in the middle here in the support. And as long as I'm careful to make sure everything's straight, that's going to be the hardest part of this. Same thing with the fuselage. You got to make sure that it's glued straight. And maybe more important on the fuselage, you've heard of like P factor and such, where if this is a spinning disc, essentially, you really want to make sure that this is reattached the way it was designed. You can actually see that motor is slightly off center to begin with. That's intentional because of P factor and different forces that cause the aircraft to want to turn left, and so they have this at a slight slant to the right to offset that, so that you as a pilot don't know better, you don't need to know better, they thought of this for you. So long story short, I just need to make sure that I reattach everything the way it was designed. I do have 30-minute epoxy. This is kind of making me rethink that. I might at some point consider getting 5-minute epoxy. The reason being is I certainly don't want to hold these things for a long period of time, and I don't want to put tape on the exterior of this to have it bond for 30 minutes, because there's a good likelihood that I'll destroy the paint when I remove that tape. So I'm going to try a different strategy today. I was kind of looking at this morning. I'm going to remove the battery, actually. What occurred to me is maybe the smart thing to do is to glue it, and then I'm thinking I'm going to try to use a toothpick, hopefully, from the inside, and I'm going to try to join it just temporarily while it dries. And so I'm going to try that. I don't know if it's going to work. I hope so, and if so, then you're going to have a small hole from the repair on the inside that nobody can see, and if I do it properly, nobody will ever know that this thing had the front nose broken off. So we're going to give that a shot. That's the plan. And I'll start by mixing up the epoxy 50/50. This epoxy is very old, which is an indication that, fortunately, I don't crash a lot, although lately I have been. I think I've been taking chances that I otherwise wouldn't have. I don't necessarily regret it. I don't like crashing, but at the same time, I bought these to have fun, right? So I'm not going to just have these things be hanger queens forever, have them parked in the house and pretty. At the end of the day, I got these to enjoy them, and so that part I don't regret. And I'm actually just really grateful that it's so minor considering the impact. The video is actually posted of the flight and the crash, so I'll post this one later, and then I'll link it so that you can see that, surprising at the speed and the angle of impact, you would have thought, or I would have thought, that there would have been a lot more damage. So what we'll do here is I'm going to glue the fuselage together. I'm going to try this technique with the toothpick and see if that holds it together. And I don't want to rush this. I don't want things crooked. So I'm going to let that sit. And for at least an hour, that means that this stuff won't be tacky anymore. It'll be completely dry. And then once the motor or the fuselage is all reattached, Then I'll come back and I'll attempt to do more or less the same thing on the landing gear. And I actually have something I need to do. I have an appointment that I need to go to anyway, but I will caution you, in my younger years, I was impatient. I wanted to do all the repairs at once and say, let me just make one batch of epoxy, glue it all together. And I'd caution against that based on my experience, is that, you know, sometimes you'll run out of time, the glue will start to dry, or maybe maybe you just can't position this thing in a way to allow it to cure and dry without stuff being crooked. Maybe you just struggle. It's a lot easier to focus on one thing at a time. In this case, I'll just make sure that the fuselage is straight, and that's my goal, right? If I was trying to get these 3 points to balance and the fuselage, I guess my point is I have no need to rush it. And in my past experience, it doesn't always turn out well trying to rush it. So just take your time, do it right. And at the end of this repair, I'm hoping that there might be some minimal obvious accident lines here, but you know, for a plane that's a year old, I think this is maybe $160. I have so many flights on this thing. I think that in terms of entertainment, it's more than paid for itself in terms of cost per hour. So we're good to go. I'm not as concerned about the way it looks. I just want to have fun with it, and I want to get it airworthy again. Alright, so I think that is very mixed up. I always take my time with mixing the epoxies to make sure that it hardens and I got the mixture right. And you can see that the crack is really all the way around. I want to be very careful not to get any epoxy near the motor, any movement parts, or around the electronics. So I'm going to just do my best to try to get glue down where it needs to go. Actually, I need to remove this sticker. I don't know, I'm not really sure what that's for, but it's kind of in the way. At least pull it back. That'll work. Alright, I've said this before, you know, more glue isn't always better, so just be careful. I mean, you do need glue to be where it needs to be, but if you're attaching something, if you have a big glob on top of foam, you're not necessarily adding any more strength, you're just making a mess. I've said before that if you can buy clear epoxy, that's what this is. It's clear epoxy, so you're not going to see some ugly yellow or orange glue if I have extra on the outside. Alright, so I'm just trying to get the joint. I'm trying to have the glue on the inside where it's actually broke, more so than on the outside. That's the goal. I might come in afterward and get, as needed, the outside of maybe this area glued together. That's probably not a bad idea too. And like I said, I don't think this is going to add a whole lot of strength because it's on top of paint, but I'm just going to add a little bit, and then I'll try to really get more glue on the inside. You know, not only do I plan to use the toothpicks for holding the foam together while it dries, but it's actually a really nice application tool to kind of spread the epoxy. So I'm gonna have to remember that. The toothpicks are a good recommendation here. Add a little bit more here. I really do enjoy this plane. You know, I've flown it in all conditions. It will fly in wind, but in calm conditions, it's a lot of fun. Very, very high lift, high drag biplane. It's lightweight, and so you can actually fly this very, very slow ground speed around circles around you. Makes it a lot of fun. I can see a bead of epoxy all the way around, except for maybe right there. I do a little bit more on this side. I can't tell if the other side's broken, so I'll just add glue just in case. Try to hide it. Probably should have made a little bit more resin. I think we're just about there in terms of it starting to get a little bit tacky. And this is what I'm saying, if I was trying to fix the wheels at the same time, that would just be a pain. All right, I think that's good. Okay, so I got the epoxy where I think it needs to be, and I think I kept it out of where it doesn't need to be. So now I'm gonna try to my idea here with the toothpick and see if I can kind of pierce one side and push through to the other. See if that worked. It looks straight. Trying to eyeball this the best I can. Now there is this hatch that sits on top, right? So I certainly don't want any extra glue on the joint. That might later limit me from putting the hatch back on. So I'll try to smooth that area out right here. So for this to be a success, what I'd like this to do is I'll leave this for an hour, and I'd like this to be straight, meaning that the joint is flush, there's no big gap. I'd like to be able to remove the toothpick, and then I would like to be able to put the hatch on. That means if all those items occur, that means that the fuselage repair will have been a success. So we'll come back in an hour and I'll let you know how that goes. We'll do it together. And if that goes as planned, we'll do the final repair here and put the wheels on. And we'll try to get this all fixed up before the family gets home, and that way there's not going to be any shame talking about a crash. They won't know about it. All right, I'll see you after this dries. All right, guys, it's been about an hour, and so I've let the epoxy cure as we were talking about. The next thing I'll do is I'm going to try to remove the toothpick. I'm going to try to test fit the cowl, and hopefully that fits. The epoxy's 30 minutes. It's still slightly tacky. But we're ready for the next step, and after we check the test fitting of the cowl, we'll go ahead and mix up another batch of epoxy, and we'll try to do the entire landing gear at once. So we'll put epoxy in each of the wheel areas, the center brace, and then we're going to try to do the same thing with the toothpicks, where we actually puncture the landing gear on both the fuselage side and the gear side. Very similar to what we did up here. And then once that's all set, I'm going to let that one dry overnight. So to that point, I'm not really bothered that that's tacky. We're going to be fine. I just want to make sure everything's glued, and that way I can place this somewhere safe and let it fully cure. All right, so let's see if this toothpick comes out. Super easy. That was great. Looks like it's a pretty good join. You can't even tell. I don't know how it is on the camera here, but I mean, you can't even tell that this whole cowling area was broken. You can see a little bit shiny of a bead where the epoxy is, but it's not ugly at all. There's no obvious damage. A little bit of shininess here, but who cares? All right, let's see if this fits. That's really good news. Definitely not something I wanted to try to fix if it didn't. So I'm very thrilled that the cowl fits. I will remove it just because it's still slightly tacky. I don't want that to dry on there, but it's good. And we'll move on to the next step. So we're going to start by mixing epoxy, and I want to make sure that I have plenty of glue. I don't want to overdo it on the application, actually placing too much glue on the aircraft. But I want to do this all in one attempt, and so I might be a little wasteful and have some left over, and that's okay. This is pretty old glue. I should probably look to replace it anyway, just because I notice it does take longer to dry than I would like. Even though it's 30 minutes, it seems like it's taking longer. And I'm pretty sure that this glue is years old. I've had it for quite a while, so it's probably due for a new batch. I will recommend, though, you always make sure you put the cap on the correct side. But I keep the epoxies inside a plastic baggie, and I did that just not to make a mess, but I think this is actually a really good way to keep epoxies good long term. Just keep them in a Ziploc, and then I just also check periodically that they're about the same, meaning that my mix ratios are pretty close. So that's always something you can check on. You know, if you're missing hardener, you're using too much hardener. They should be 50-50, or whatever your brand says. In this case, it's 50-50 application. All right, we're gonna do a quick mix job. We're gonna be quick but thorough. And I think for this time, I'm going to put all the epoxy more or less on the bigger surface, which will be the fuselage. And then once I'm happy with the amount of epoxy on the fuselage side where the joint broke, I'll just go ahead and try to put the landing gear in place without putting separate glue on the landing gear. I don't want glue everywhere. So we'll just try to contain it to the fuselage. Now, if you're using 5-minute epoxy, you might want to go a little bit quicker than I am because I have so much time in terms of the 30-minute resin. I just want to make sure it's thoroughly mixed, but you got to be careful. If you're doing this with 5-minute epoxy, if let's say you're on the patio and it's warmer out, it's very possible that maybe for what I'm doing with this repair, I don't think I'd want 5-minute epoxy. You actually might run out of time. All right, I'm pretty satisfied with the mix. So we'll be putting epoxy here, here, and here. And just because the glue might not be mixed all the way on the stick, I'm gonna use a fresh application, fresh stick for that. And I'm gonna go a little bit heavy, just in case we're missing some foam. There's a good chance that I'm missing little pieces. And so down inside the fuselage, the epoxy will fill any of those holes. Now up above, I'm not going to get as crazy and try to only put the epoxy we need and try to contain it to the surface only of the raw foam. Now I anticipate some of this will squeeze out onto the fuselage once I put the gear in place, and that's fine. Now this is a load bearing. You know, you might have a rough landing or something, so I guess what I'm saying is you want to make sure you're bonding this sufficiently to absorb any future impact. And hopefully your impacts aren't too hard anyway. All right. Okay, I'm gonna put epoxy in the center here in the fuselage. Now what I didn't think of is I'm hoping this doesn't go right through into the fuselage, because as it's upside down, I'm hoping that I'm not getting glue on stuff internally. That would have been a good idea to check, but it's already done. All right, I put a ton of glue on there, as you can probably tell. And at this point, we're just going to hope for the best and put the gear in place. And hopefully not make too big of a mess. A lot of extra glue here in the middle. It's not really needed, but that's all right. Try to clean it up a little bit. Because it is slow 30-minute, it will tend to flatten out and be smooth and not big, rough epoxy edges, so it won't be as noticeable even if you do have extra. All right. So we are going to try to put toothpicks in this now. Again, it's one of those things where it seems like a really simple concept, but it's kind of difficult actually. You just run out of hands. All right. Okay, that seemed to have worked. I'll try to do the front. You know what? I don't want a hole in the front of that. It appears that it's in there pretty good. It's already bad enough that I have that line of crack. I'm just going to smooth this out. I'm sure you could get paint appropriate for foam and match this, but I'm just going to let it be. I just want to be able to fly it again. So the primary concern is structural integrity and making sure that the wheels are straight, because tail draggers are already difficult enough to land, and I don't want these wheels to be crooked. But you know what? I'm good with that wheel. I'm going to try this other side here. Yeah, I couldn't imagine being on a clock trying to do this in a couple minutes. Okay. I can tell it's attached because I can kind of wiggle it, or I can try to wiggle it and it won't move, so it's definitely the gear is attached to the fuselage even though the stick's not in all the way. And same thing with the other side. It looks pretty flush. It's really important on the glue joint. You want the structures to be flush. If there's a big gap there of air, that's not a strong joint. But what I'm seeing here is it looks pretty smooth on both sides. I'm just gonna get the epoxy smoothed as well. I know it's not beautiful with the accident there, but the repair job, I'm pretty happy with that. Like I said, you want to make sure it's straight, right? If you're landing in the future, you don't want it to be all crooked. So I'm kind of giving a holistic, does it look straight? I think it does. So now I'm just going to go ahead and smooth out the epoxy at the bottom. That one had way too much resin. Hard part is trying to find a place that's uninterrupted so you don't damage this while it's drying. Yep, looks pretty good. I will let you guys know how this goes if it goes to plan. Probably leave this to dry upside down so that there's no pressure on the gear. Assuming everything goes well, this will be cured overnight, and then I'll fly it in the next few days. And if it flies okay, if it rolls straight, then mission accomplished and it worked. So please like and subscribe. If you have any questions with aircraft repair or anything I've shown you here, If you have any questions on the Umx Waco, I'm happy to fill you in. I love this aircraft. I think it's awesome. I actually bought my dad the red one, which also looks very nice. But I like the Bumblebee version. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.